All right, good morning. I'm not going to make you guys stand again, but everybody stretch. Stretch just a little bit. This is for me, not for you. But if I do it alone, I'll look ridiculous. So, make you all do it with me. I mean, for the record, I would be fine looking ridiculous all on my own. I do it quite often, but I prefer to have others with me if I can. So, this morning we're going to continue our look at stories that are overlooked within Scripture, looking specifically now at seeking justice in an unjust world. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but sometimes we have conflict, sometimes on a national level, and it doesn't really seem like there is a single solution that just fixes everything. Right? And we see it play out in a very polemic type way where you have, everyone thinks they're the good guy, right? But the good guy versus the bad guy. And everyone else's idea is that they're the bad guy. And if they have an idea different than yours, they're bad. Everyone that's with me, well, they're good. And people on the other side say, no, we're the good guys and you are the bad guys. But we all say we're looking for some sort of justice or some sort of solution to a problem. And we often will go about it in very unusual but very human-like ways. So we've looked at the story of Judah and Tamar. If you remember this is the one where Judah had his 3 sons. They married the first one, the oldest son, off to Tamar. The Bible says that his name was and he was a wicked man, and God killed him. And then he had another son named Onan, and he took the place of his brother, but he didn't want to have his brother's kids, because that's kind of how it worked in their minds, even though it was technically, according to DNA, it was his kid, but according to their tradition, it was the brother's child. And he said, I don't really feel like having children for my brother. And so he did what he had to do to not do that. You guys remember the story. I don't need to rehash it all here. And then he died. And then so Judah said, I've lost 2 sons to this woman. I don't know what's going on, but my youngest one is not going to marry her. So he says to her, Tamar, you need to go and just live like a widow until my youngest son's old enough to marry you. Yeah, that's it. Don't call me, I'll call you. And he never called, of course, and so she devises a plan. She dresses up as a prostitute, sits outside the side of the city gate. Judah's wife had died, and he goes, oh, look, a prostitute. And he does what he feels like he has to do, and it ends up being his child that she bears. It's this big, dramatic, soap opera-like story, right? And we read a story like that, well, who's to blame here? Whose fault is it? Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Well, Judah at the end of the story will say, Tamar is the good one. I was the bad one. But sometimes as a father, I think to myself, if I had 3 sons and 2 of them had married a woman and they both ended up dead, I've watched enough Netflix documentaries to know that I am dealing with a serial killer. There's no way I'm marrying off my youngest son to her too. He'll be dead and I'll have no children. So is he really the bad guy? Oh, maybe Tamar's to blame. I mean, what's she doing dressing up like that anyway, trying to trick him? Sneaky little deceitful woman. What's she doing? Well, she's not killing the sons. The Bible says God killed the sons. She knows she's not going to be turned into a documentary series on Netflix. She's not a serial killer. And if she doesn't have a child, she has nothing. So is she the bad guy or is she the good one? Or maybe they both have understandable sides, if we'll just take the time to look at both sides of the story. We looked at, we didn't look at this one, Dinos Brothers. So this one was one that I would love to turn into a sermon if I only knew how to do it. It's a weird story in Genesis. It's where the Bible says that Dino was taken advantage of by these men, or actually by a man from Shechem, but it also says that this man loved her. And so it's kind of this weird story. And the brothers say, you have defiled our sister. We have devised a plan to kill all of you. And so they convince somehow all the men of the town to get circumcised. And then on the 3rd day after the circumcision, they go into swords and they kill them all. Because, they couldn't really defend themselves. That was the idea. And we think, well, who's the good guy and the bad guy in this story? Judah is the father. Again, Judah's in this story. And he says, what have you guys done? And they said, well, what were we supposed to do? Nothing. They treated our sister like a prostitute. We supposed to just sit back and let that happen? Sometimes we try to figure out, well, what side of the story are we supposed to stand on? Which one is the good side and which one is the bad side? We've looked at Jacob and Esau, and in one story, we looked at this actually a couple times. One time we looked at it from the perspective of Jacob. Because Jacob is living in a culture as the second-born son, where no matter what he does, he will always be second best. Why? Because he was born second. Doesn't matter how good he is, doesn't matter how smart he is, doesn't matter how educated he is, or how many languages he speaks, or how nice he is, or none of it matters because he was born second. Is that fair? Is he supposed to stand around and do nothing? Just be second place all the time? So he tricks people. That's actually his name, as we said. His name is the trickster, the heel. We also looked at it from the perspective of Esau, the older brother, who Esau is also, it's like these two brothers were never meant to get along. Before birth, they were fighting. And they live in a household where daddy loves the older son because he makes a good meal from the wild game that's out in the fields. Oh, I love him more than I love my other son. But Jacob likes to hang out in tents, and so his mama, who's often in the tents with him, loves him more. So who's to blame? Who's the good guy? Is Esau the good guy? I mean, it says at the end that Jacob is afraid for his life and Esau forgives him. Remember last week's sermon? He saw the face of God and he saw the face of Esau because Esau accepted him. Who is the good guy and who is the bad guy and who's to blame? We're always looking for a person or a group or an idea to blame. Preferably if that idea has a face, so we can attach a name to that idea. And we will demonize that other group because they disagree with us. And so from the beginning, we've been trying to blame someone. Adam actually blames God, remember? Well, God, that woman you gave me. And he goes, the woman, well, the snake. And God goes, the snake. And this round and round they go. Always looking for some side to take and some person to blame. So this morning we're going to look at an overlooked story called The 5 Daughters of Zelophehad. Now, I have talked about this before, but I don't think I've preached on it before. I know I've taught a Wednesday night class on it, a Sunday morning class on it. We went through the book of Numbers, but I don't know if we've actually done it here. But as I've also discovered, even if we have, we forget most of what we hear. So you may have heard this story before and leave here going, I've never heard that story before. That's amazing. That's a crazy story. So anyway, the 5 daughters of Zelophehad. Here we go. Numbers chapter 27. This story is actually spread out over 2 chapters in Numbers and another chapter in another book of Scripture. So here we go. Numbers 27. The daughters of Zelophehad, son of Hepher, the son of Gilead, the son of Machir, the son of Manasseh, belonged to the clans of Manasseh, son of Joseph. The names of the daughters were Mahlah, Noah, Hoglah, Milcah, and Tirzah. All of those names we use every day. Well, Noah, you'll still see people named that, but none of the other ones. I'm going to name my daughter Tirzah. I like that. They came forward and stood before Moses, Eleazar the priest, the leaders, and the whole assembly at the entrance to the tent of meeting, and said, so you've got these 5 daughters. Zelophehad's the father, from the tribe of Manasseh. They have these 5 daughters, and they're going to go to Moses and to Eleazar. And if you've read through the book of Numbers, you know that typically when people come to Moses with something, they have a complaint. Yes, they're always complaining. And normally, in the book of Numbers, it turns out very poorly for them. Normally there's snakes involved, or fires, or pits that open up. So if you're reading through Numbers, you come upon this story, you come to this point, you might think, here we go again. Some other group of whiners complaining about something, and God's going to have to deal out some punishment for them. So they come and they say, our father died in the wilderness. He was not among Korah's followers who banded together against the Lord, but he died for his own sin and left no son. So they have this problem. They have no brothers. Their father has died. Their father was not part of the rebellion. He just died because he was part of the group that complained originally, and he was that first generation that just had to go. So he's already died. He's died along the way. And now we're here and we have no brothers. He's left no sons. Why should our father's name disappear from his clan because he had no son? Give us property among our father's relatives. So they have a problem. The problem is, as daughters, they have no right to receive as an inheritance the properties that were promised to them if they'd only had a brother. So they fear they'll have nowhere to live. And they say, Moses, that is not fair. The system is flawed, Moses. Does it sound fair to you? Just because they don't have a brother, they end up homeless? They have no land to call their own. They have no land to grow crops. They have no land to live. What if they do get married one day later on? They have no land to raise their children. What are they supposed to do? And so they go to Moses and they say, what are we supposed to do? We think that we should be able to have property. Sounds fair. They recognize a flaw in the system. Actually, the flaw we can find in Deuteronomy 21, which is also a curious passage. It says, if a man has two wives, this applies to none of us. If a man has two wives and he loves one but not the other, then why did he marry the other? I don't know, he says, but he loves one and not the other, and both bear him sons, but the firstborn is the son of the wife he does not love. Are you following? Man's got two wives, he's got two sons. The firstborn son, who is supposed to receive, like Esau, is supposed to receive the double portion. Well, that is the son of the wife he's just not too fond of. Doesn't really like her, doesn't want to be with her, does not want to give that son what rightfully belongs to him. It says, when he wills his property to his sons, he must not give the rights of the firstborn to the son of the wife he loves in preference to his actual firstborn, the son of the wife he does not love. In other words, it doesn't matter whether you love her or don't love her, her son is firstborn and therefore deserves it, whether or not you like your wife. I'm finding all kinds of direct applications for my own personal walk with the Lord here. It's amazing. He must acknowledge the son of his unloved wife as the firstborn by giving him a double share of all he has. That son is the first sign of his father's strength. The right of the firstborn belongs to him. So this is where we find the flaw in the system. It takes as a given that it doesn't matter if you have a firstborn daughter. Did you notice that? You got so caught up in the son, the wife that he loved and the wife he didn't. Maybe you didn't notice. What if he has a firstborn daughter? Sorry? Firstborn daughter gets, well, she doesn't get anything. It's the firstborn son that gets something. You see, there is a flaw in the system. And I actually have this next slide in here for one person in particular, but, oh, there she is. Our Disney fan. If it's not Baroque, don't fix it. How many of you seen Beauty and the Beast? I know I normally strike out with these references, but I thought I might. Almost 50%. It's a line from Beauty and the Beast. Cogsworth makes a play on words. If it's not Baroque, don't fix it. The problem is the system that they have, it is broke. And it does need to be fixed. And so the sisters might be wondering, well, who's to blame for this injustice? Whose fault is it? How do we fix this? So Moses brought their case before the Lord, and the Lord said to him, what Zelophehad's daughters are saying is right. Okay. A little different for Book of Numbers. God says, actually, they've got a good point. Actually, there's something wrong here. There's something deeply flawed in the very fabric of how we have our society established. There's something deeply flawed, and we must fix it. You must certainly give them property as an inheritance among their father's relatives and give their father's inheritance to them. So God says, let's change it. We're going to change it because it needs to be changed. Say to the Israelites, if a man dies and leaves no son, so he's not changing completely. It's just we're going to create a secondary law underneath of this one that says, but if in case there is no son, he doesn't say it doesn't matter if there's sons or daughters, just everyone gets an inheritance. He says, what if there is no son? Here's what we'll do. We'll give his inheritance to his daughter. If he has no daughter, so we're going to cover all the bases, there will possibly be a chance that another change will have to be made once we're done with this one. If he has no daughter, give his inheritance to his brothers. If he has no brothers, give his inheritance to his father's brothers. If his father had no brothers, give his inheritance to the nearest relative in his clan, that he may possess it. This is to have the force of law for the Israelites, as the Lord commanded Moses. So the law has finally been fixed forever. Now you may be sensing that I'm saying it with a little bit of a sarcastic note in my tone. You are correct. You would think, though, after all of those exceptions, if there's this, then do this. If there's not that, then do this. If there's not that, then do this. If there's not that, then do that. Then he would have covered all the bases. There can't possibly be another complaint where someone says, hey, the system is still broken. Numbers chapter 36. And if you're curious, this is actually how the book of Numbers ends. It says, the family heads of the clan of Gilead, son of Machir, we've heard this name before, the son of Manasseh, who from the clans of the descendants of Joseph, so same clans as Zelophehad and his 5 daughters, same clan, came and spoke before Moses and the leaders, the heads of the Israelite families. They said, when the Lord commanded my Lord to give the land as an inheritance to the Israelites by lot, he ordered you to give the inheritance of our brother Zelophehad to his daughter. So they say, okay, we recognize that this took place. Now suppose they marry men from other Israelite tribes. Then their inheritance will be taken from our ancestral inheritance and added to that of the tribe they marry into. So in other words, what if Noah, not the flood Noah, but the daughter Noah, marries someone from another tribe? Now that land that's supposed to belong to the clan of Manasseh will get transferred to the other clan, and we'll be losing property that belongs to us. When God divided up the land, he said, this belongs to Manasseh, this belongs to Judah, this belongs to the Benjaminites. If this happens, it's not fair. It is not fair. The clan of Manasseh will be losing land. When the year of Jubilee for the Israelite comes, so this year of Jubilee, if you're not familiar with it, it's this time where it's kind of like a big reset button. Like when your computer develops so many problems and you have to do a scan. What's this called? Where you have to clean the disk and you got to start all over. It's a reset. There's an actual name for the disk itself. The word's escaping me right now. It's like the big reset button. Jubilee is like everything goes back to the way it's supposed to be. They say this thing that's supposed to provide justice and fairness and rightness for every tribe and every clan. So in other words, any clans who along the way have come upon bad luck and had to have given their property to another clan so that they could work it and they could harvest it, and that land gets treated as that new clan's land. At Jubilee, it all goes back to the way it was before. But now that land belongs to a different clan. And that's not fair, Moses. All those changes that you guys made, it's not fair. We'll actually end up losing property. The very thing that's supposed to provide fairness will be a tool for unfairness. And it says, and their property will be taken from the tribal inheritance of our ancestors. So it's not right. Then at the Lord's command, Moses gave this order to the Israelites. What the tribe of the descendants of Joseph is saying is right. Oh, man, okay. They did have to change it again. If you're counting, this is 3 times. There's the first one where it says everything goes to the firstborn, double portion. There's a second one where the daughters say, this isn't fair. We don't have any brothers. We don't get anything. The third one is when the clan comes and says, it's still not fair. Let's change it again. Just as a total side note, when I've taught on this before, I've actually focused more in on the fact that God seems to be changing his law quite a bit to make it more fair. But this morning I want to focus in on the other side of that same coin, which is there's actually something wrong with the system itself. And God is continually amending that system to make it more fair. What the tribe of the descendants of Joseph is saying is right. This is what the Lord commands for Zelophehad's daughters. They may marry anyone they please, as long as they marry within their father's tribal clan. So you can't go off and marry anyone that you might want to marry if you don't have any brothers. If you have brothers, marry whoever you want from the tribes of Israel. But if you don't have any brothers, the swimming pool got way smaller. You better like you some Manassehite boys, because that's all the further you're allowed to go. You may sense that it sounds like something's still flawed in the system. That's because sometimes we don't have a perfect system, no matter how hard we try. It says, no inheritance in Israel is to pass from one tribe to another, for every Israelite shall keep their tribal inheritance of their ancestors. Every daughter who inherits land in any Israelite tribe must marry someone in her father's tribal clan, so that every Israelite will possess the inheritance of their ancestors. No inheritance may pass from one tribe to another, for each Israelite tribe is to keep the land it inherits. So this is their fix to this problem. Now you may wonder, what does this have to do with anything? Sometimes we live in such a way that we assume that the things that we do and the way that we do things is the right way. And the way that I think about things is the right way. But actually sometimes it's even worse than that. We don't even think about how things are done. Sometimes we're taking baths in dirty water. And if you were dirty and you thought, I'm going to get cleaned up by taking a bath in that water, you're still dirty. Because the water is still dirty. Another analogy, if the soil is poisoned. In other words, if you imagine your life like a garden and you're planting and you're trying to make a living for yourself and you're trying to provide for the future, but if you're planting in poisoned soil, you're not going to have very good fruit. Or maybe this one, if the foundation is fractured. You see, the Jewish people in the book of Numbers, they are a nation recently released from Egypt. They have gone through the Exodus. They haven't yet arrived at the Promised Land, and they're trying to establish a society for everyone that is fair and right and just. But sometimes the foundation of that society, it's fractured. You see, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to say something without saying too much. And if you build a society, okay, maybe you don't like society. If you build your family the way that Isaac and Rebekah built their family, it should be no surprise if you end up with a Jacob and an Esau. Where they fight and fight. And one of them is always tricking the other one, where one parent loves one kid and the other parent loves the other kid. And at the end, they both end up hating the same kid. And that kid runs off, it's Esau, and runs off. And he goes away. And he never experiences the acceptance and love of his parents. Because the foundation of that family was built on a fractured foundation. You see, sometimes we read these stories. Well, sometimes we don't read these stories at all. But we're fixing that right now. And sometimes we'll read these stories and we'll try to find just a very personal, my life, my work, my family, my school application, which is totally fine. But we need to learn how to see not just the micro applications where we can apply it just to our own lives, but where we can also look at it and say, what about our church? Something a little bigger than just me and my house or in my job or my school. Something a little bigger than that. What about our church? Is there anything underneath of this church, not the building, but structurally, metaphorically under the church, that's not quite right and needs to be fixed? A little bit bigger than that. What about our community? Is there anything happening in our community where it's not their fault or his fault or her fault? It's the system is broken and it is Baroque. So you do fix it. How about bigger than that? Is it possible to have an entire nation built on a fractured foundation that needs some repair? We're not done with the story of these 5 daughters yet. Joshua chapter 17. Hey, Joshua, that's a whole new book and a whole new place. Yes! It says, Maha, Noah, Hogar, Milcah, and Tirzah went to Eleazar the priest, Joshua son of Nun, and the leaders, and said, because Moses is gone. Moses has died. Aaron died quite some time before that. Miriam has also died. This is a whole new group. Except for Eleazar the priest, he's the same. So they come back. Years have gone by. They come back and they say, the Lord commanded Moses to give us an inheritance among our relatives. So Joshua gave them an inheritance. I wonder how much time went by between God saying, give it to them, and someone actually giving it to them. How long did they have to live in that limbo of saying, hey, something was promised to me. You said we were going to be given this land. You said we could build here. You said we could grow here. You said that this is our property, but no one has ever done anything to give it to us. Now, granted, some of that's because they're still traversing. They're not there yet. But when they get there and they start divvying up the land, someone has to remind them. What might have otherwise been an empty promise, someone had to say, hold up. Remember us? We still ain't married. Are you going to give us what you said you were going to give us? And Joshua completes that promise. Sometimes justice needs to be reminded of promises that were made. We have some such story in our own history. You ever heard of 40 mules or 40 acres and a mule? It's where the emancipated slaves were promised. They said, hey, thanks for freeing us, but we got nowhere to go. We have no land to live on. It's a very similar story. We have no land to live on, no land to grow on, no land to raise a family. We have nothing. We have no education. All we have is the skill to work in a field, but we don't have a field. And so they promised them, every freed slave is going to get 40 acres of land and a mule to work it with. But then Abraham Lincoln died, like Moses died. But there was no Joshua to complete that promise. Actually, there was the opposite of Joshua that came in and said, nix that, you get nothing. You get absolutely nothing. Good luck on all your future endeavors. You see, justice should always be our desire. In your own personal life, absolutely. And honestly, your own personal life is probably the area that you have the most control over. And so our desire should always be to be just and fair people. Are you always going to do it perfectly? Nope. How many times did God have to change it? You're never going to get it perfect, but it should always be our desire to live a just and fair life as best we can. In our personal lives, in our families, in our church. You may think, in our church, what do you mean? Do you know there are some places where you can't even talk to a person like me? There are some churches you can't even talk to the pastor of the church. You've got about 3 gatekeepers to get through before you can get to him. Inaccessible. Some people can, and normally those people are people with money. There's something deeply, deeply flawed in our system. It's not a biblical system, but it's a system that we have come to accept in many places and have just accepted that that's just the way it is. Well, of course, not everyone can talk to the pastor. Of course, not everybody. Why not? Why not? I'm just like you guys. Not that those of you who know me really well know you're worse than us, and that's probably true. I've often said the only thing that makes me any different is the fact that I can get up here and stand behind a microphone and it doesn't scare me. I'm okay. For many people, this is like the last thing they'd ever want to do, ever. There's something wrong with our system. There's something wrong with the foundations that have been laid under many churches, or maybe even under the Western Christian movement. There are some cracks in our foundation. And if you look at the percentages of people leaving church, you can see it. We've been unwilling to look at our system and say, is there anything that needs fixed? And generally you do that because you're the one benefiting from it not being fixed. So you don't fix it. Because to you it's not broken. It works just fine. But Jesus calls us to think of others. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. We're called to think about the needs and positions of other people, not just our own. So often we would think of our own as the good guys, and them over there as the bad guys. But Jesus actually teaches us that we don't have any enemies. That to us, as far as we're concerned, everybody is our neighbor. Everybody is our brother. Everyone's our sister. And we're called to love everyone. And sometimes that means that we need to change things that perhaps we don't want to change because we kind of like it. Or we don't even know that there's anything wrong because we haven't been listening. The 5 daughters come and they go, and we've never heard a word about it. Another 5 daughters come and they go, and we don't know they came and went. And another set, and another set. But at some point, we've got to listen. Justice should be our desire in every area and aspect of life. We're going to sing one more song. I ask that you all be standing. If you have something that you want to pray about or something that's on your mind, feel free to come up as we stand and sing this last song together.